Evening. Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. We have one agenda item tonight, and it is an important one. We will be continuing the conversation that we started in January around our budget, and we are winding down that conversation, moving toward a final budget approval, which will be easier to do now that we understand what we're getting from the state in terms of funding. So we'll invite Director Chapanduka to the table. I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening, board members, colleagues in the physical space, and community members, parents who may be listening online. So I believe the slide deck has been shared with board members as well as posted. And Director Chapanduka, do you want me to share, or
yeah,
who are we? Sorry, who's sharing the slide deck?
Alice yeah.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Elise. So I think Director Chapanduka and I are going to tag team this one, and what we wanted to do actually is share some information with you that we are also sharing with teachers and staff who attend one of the 2 virtual budget info sessions that we've set up for staff in the district. So we had one yesterday, and we had about 56 folks attend, and then we'll have another one tomorrow at 4:30. And you know, we're in a space in time when there are scarce resources that are impacting schools and districts across our state. And the legislature has recently passed the Omnibus Finance Bill for Education, which will give districts some extra resources, but we want to be very mindful of where we are with our with current needs that have been met, current needs that have not been met, and what any extra resources might do for us. So we were together with our staff yesterday and just sort of started at ground zero, did about a 30-minute presentation, and then opened it up for Q&A, and there was a really healthy discussion that followed. So if we go to the next slide, wanted to remind our board and also perhaps a little bit of education for our community that there is a very cyclical process that we follow when we're engaged in district-wide budgeting, and it starts with the school year, August through November. We're looking at current enrollment, and we're looking at all of the students who do show up into our schools, comparing current to projected enrollments in case there are some emerging patterns that might inform adjustments to future projections. So enrollment is a really important ingredient in this process, something that we're constantly monitoring from the beginning of the year. And around the same time, we're beginning to partner with our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, CFAC, which is a small group of parents and even board members who have some finance and accounting expertise so that they can look at enrollment, look at statewide and regional circumstances, and begin to identify parameters that might inform the decisions made at the school board table. And while this is happening, of course, we're then starting to engage with the district-wide audit. It's maybe a little bit unusual for this year that the audit has not yet been completed, but we did have 2 years of federal COVID relief dollars that I think provided a lot of extra information that needed to be analyzed. So the district-wide audit is an important part of the budgeting process. And also during this time, we are putting together the legislative platform. So at the local level, our Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition, and then also at the state level with various state organizations. One thing that we did to be proactive this year is held weekly budgeting meetings with all of our leaders, starting in September, literally meeting weekly, Thursdays from 9 to noon. And I shared with teachers yesterday that we're continuing to think about ways that we can have more input and more authentic inclusivity, which is one of our core values, so that when decisions are being made, they truly do represent a variety of perspectives, including teachers who will be enacting many of the staffing decisions. And then we recently came out of a period where Taruro and his team put together preliminary budgets and staffing allocations for school leaders and district department leaders. And these were preliminary because obviously we are waiting for the state to make its decisions. And we're now entering into the time period where Taruro and his team are looking at the information from the audit being finalized and also information from the budget package to inform how we might meet some of the unmet needs. So that's a lot that goes into the annual budgeting cycle. And of course, on the right, there are a number of factors that Minnesota districts had to navigate during this entire time. For example, the federal COVID relief funds no longer being available, and thinking about sustainability of staffing and programs, the impact of historical underfunding by the state, compounded by pretty severe spikes in inflationary expenses, declining enrollment truly across the state. And in Hopkins, we are impacted by a slight decline in enrollment, but we also consider ourselves fortunate to not have been hit as hard as some of our other districts in Minnesota. And then, of course, the uncertainty of what our state legislators would decide. So that's a lot of unknown and strong considerations that impact the discussion and the decision-making processes. Also wanted to review for our school board members and our community members a number of the priorities that we try to keep in the forefront of our discussion and decision-making. For example, enhancing our predictable staffing model so that we are thoughtfully and predictably and equitably allocating resources across our schools and programs. Increasing our focus on instructional quality and academic rigor. You've heard about our innovation design and learning department, ensuring that K-2 teachers are trained in the science of reading. We are focused on K-12 math reimagining, and we want to make sure that our students are experiencing at grade level and rigorous instruction at all grade levels, and especially as they get to high school, ensuring that we're increasing the number of opportunities and the number of students enrolled in advanced courses, and also planning career-aligned pathways in intentional ways. So one example of that is our Certified Nursing Assistant program being launched this fall at Hopkins High School. We also have a strong investment in early childhood that is also supported at the state level. And we want to make sure that our students in grades K through 5 have opportunities to have their talents developed in school-wide programming. We also have heard from our community that Chinese, Spanish, outdoor immersion continue to be high interest programs, so we want to support those, supporting project-based learning, advanced placement, program increases at our high school, K-12 virtual EDU has become a very high interest program, and so we do have a responsibility in our district to think about the niche and sort of value add programming that our families find attractive and help them choose Hopkins as a place to learn and stay. Talked about strengthening career technical education pathways at Hopkins High School, the importance of a strong Tier 1 instruction being undergirded by restorative and wellness practices is another focus. And then this whole year, we have been preparing our system to transition 6th graders to the middle schools and 9th graders to the high school for the 23-24 school year. So that's a lot of focus areas. But we are a complex system with, pre-K all the way through grade 12 and beyond, and we want to be intentional about aligning fiscal resources with the programs and priorities that are part of our strategic plan. So then yesterday when we were with our teachers, and a lot of this information has also been shared in Hopkins All emails, but because people don't always have time to read dense or lengthy emails, then we thought it would be helpful to put together a couple of virtual learning and discussion opportunities. But we did talk about enrollment yesterday, and enrollment really being a driving factor in our revenue and also in all of our decision making. But our enrollment projections are informed by a lot of variables, including family choice, demographics, housing trends, and I'm really grateful for our enrollment team and our communications and marketing team blending together to put a marketing lens on enrollment. And then, of course, we have a couple of data specialists who study all of our enrollment patterns to help us make smart choices. This is a slide that hopefully many of our staff, you can go to the next one, the post-pandemic enrollment trends. So when we were watching enrollment patterns across those 2 years of COVID, we noticed some interesting things. So we did notice that our kindergarten enrollment remained stable. We noticed that overall our enrollment in and enrollment out percentages didn't have that much change. Our immersion enrollment stayed strong. And then some of the factors that were a little bit more surprising to us included increased mobility across various buildings and grade levels, increased families moving out of the country, out of the state, but also a slight increase in the number of local families choosing another district. And all of these and additional factors are the variables that work together to inform enrollment, 5-year enrollment projections. So this next slide, students exiting in the 21-22 school year, is a really interesting one for many of us as we think about what's within our sphere of control and some of the decisions that families are making because of their personal circumstances that would be outside of our control. But the one row, the blue row in the right column, the number of students who transferred out of Hopkins for another district in the West Metro area is something that we really want to focus on, studying what is it families are seeking and what are the best practices around keeping the families that do choose Hopkins. So these are some data points that we shared with staff yesterday. And then we shared with staff that prior to COVID, we actually started seeing a pattern of slightly increased enrollment, in fact, exceeding projections But COVID really did interrupt the enrollment patterns for many districts across the state and country. And I shared in a recent email to staff that there have been a lot of articles about the fact that nearly 3 million children literally like dropped out of the public school system across the entire country, with some going to privates in the more affluent areas of our country, but in low-income areas, there are children who are unaccounted for, who are not attending school. And so if we look at this in more of a localized way, then you can see that we are projecting very slight decline in enrollment. I've heard Torero and others also refer to it as stable, right? So it's slightly declining, not a sharp decline, and hopefully we can work really intentionally to have those numbers turn around so that we in fact start to see slight increase in enrollment. And for me and for many of us, that's the work in front of us. So I'm going to turn this over to Torero so that he can talk about the budgeting process and many of the factors that inform where we are with our preliminary allocation moving toward a finalized budget.
Thank you, Dr. Mirpir-Reid. Good evening, respective board members. I know some of the information has already been shared at our April 24th meeting. There's also some new information based on what we have heard from the legislature. So I'll share some of that preliminary information. We haven't finalized on how the resources will be allocated and distributed, but I have some preliminary details around some of the revenue and some of the prep work we've already done, one based on feedback from the community, and some of the homework we had given to building leaders in terms of the gap between what was allocated through the preliminary budget. So a lot of the information is tied to what was shared previously. One starting with the conversation and recommendations which came from the CFAC and presented to the board in February, which actually informed our initial iterations around how the budget was going to look like and how resources were going to be allocated. Again, we started with the base allocation, which was actually informed by the predictable staffing model. And we've used formulas and ranges with the intention being that we want to free resources for buildings to make decisions based on priorities and needs within our different buildings and demographics. When we did the preliminary budget, we factored a 0% state revenue increase. I know, we've received some of the proposed information of 4% in fiscal year 24 and 2% in fiscal year 25, with 3% inflation increases going into the future. And we'll talk about that, also factoring in some of the shifts like the superintendent mentioned we've seen with enrollment. When we were building the preliminary budget, we put into consideration the cost of living adjustment, which we pegged at 3%, fringe benefits, which we pegged at an increase of 3%, from 39% to 42%. 7% inflationary increases based on the consumer price index on purchase services, supplies, utilities, and energy. We also started to look holistically at some of our categorical funding and how those have actually been structured in the past, and start to look at everything at the district-wide level. So when you start to look at title, which in the past was actually allocated to 4 elementary schools, now we are distributing those resources across both our elementary and secondary, as long as they qualify based on federal guideline. ATSIS, achievement and integration. So there has been some changes in the way we allocate resources going in fiscal year 24. And also put into the mix the 6-9 grade configuration, which was also a challenge trying to navigate what that would mean across our different buildings. We didn't factor in any of the remaining ESA 3 funds. We are getting into the last year for ESA allocations. Those funds have already been allocated to buildings, so buildings have been using those funds for any additional needs, depending with priorities, as well as guidelines from the federal government. Where we are right now, fund balance is still sitting at 10%. Like the superintendent had mentioned, we are putting some final touches to the audit. Nothing really has changed from the presentation which was done on April 25th by the auditors. There's still a few things we are finalizing on testing. Yes, those were the components which informed allocations into the buildings. And we'll definitely go back into looking at what may need to be tweaked to accommodate allocating any of the additional funds we may be receiving. So as we've discussed previously, our general fund revenue comes from different sources. Some of those sources are local, some are provided at state level, some are provided at federal level. So what I have here is just a breakdown of some of those resources. Again, this is based on a 0% increase. We'll make the necessary adjustments for June 6th board meeting to reflect any of the increases. But I'll share with you as we go through the slide deck some of the information which has been shared from the state on what those increases look like and what they may mean in terms of where the increases will be lying. So our operating revenue, our operating referendum, which is voter approved, accounts for 15.1% of our total general fund revenue. Right now, sitting at about 17.6, and we are not anticipating any change to that allocation. Our location equity, which is board approved, accounts for 4.7% or $5.4 million. Our capital projects levy, which is voter approved, accounts for 11% or $12.9 million. Our integration aid accounts for 1.2% or $1.4 million. Our compensatory aid account for 4.4%. Right now it's reflecting 5.1, but we have some changes based on the new calculations from the state, so those will be reflected. Our English learners account for 0.3 or $392,000. Again, that's another area which is some changes based on the new legislative update. Special education, 9.4% or $10.9 million. Again, another change which is coming. I think that's the biggest change we'll see in terms of any dollar coming into the district. Federal grants, which may be title or some of the ESA dollars, accounts for 2.6% or $3 million. Extended time, 0.4%, $409,000. And the rest is non-categorical, general aid, which account for about 51%. Again, there is going to be some changes within those categories because that's where we actually house our basic allowance, where the formula was increased by the 4%. On the expenditure side, 56% or $65.4 million accounts for salaries and wages. 23.5% or $27.4 million accounts for benefits. 14.8% or $17.3 million accounts for purchase services. This includes things like transportation, some of the contracted services we have with different third parties in our system when it comes to maintaining our buildings, when it comes to other specialized services the district may not be able to provide, that all is accounted within the purchase services. Supplies, 2.87% or $3.3 million. Capital expenditures, 1.4% or $1.7 million. This may include furniture and fixtures and any other capital items which do not fit within our capital projects, either the capital projects levy or our capital plan. 1.3% or $1.5 million. These are other expenditures. Things like dues and conferences or any other miscellaneous items which do not fit within the other categories as specified by the Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting Standards. So as presented, we do have general fund revenue currently before we make any additional allocations of 116.8 and general fund expenditures of 116.8, but we'll definitely go deeper into some of the information we've been collecting as we modify and apply any of the general fund revenue we know we'll be receiving based on our current enrollment projections. So having said that, we also went ahead and tried to break down the allocations by how much of these dollars are going directly into schools, how much of the dollars are being controlled at the central office but going into buildings, and how much of the dollars are allocated to our departments. So about 57% or $67.1 million is direct school allocation, either through the predictable staffing model or through discretionary and categorical funding, again based on enrollment. $43.6 million or 37% district-wide allocations. So transportation, although it's directly going into the buildings, is centrally managed. So transportation, our custodians, they are in buildings, but they are centrally managed. A lot of our utilities and maintenance costs are happening in buildings, but they are centrally managed. So all those components, they do have a direct impact in the building, but they are sitting at the central level. And then about 5%, or $6.1 million, these are department allocations. Obviously, things like business office, payroll, accounts payable, our receipts, our receivables, human resources, governance and management, superintendent's office, the board. We have IDL, we have some of the central office within special education. They all sit within the 5%. So to sum it up, about 95% of resources are directly impacting buildings, and 5% support services into all the programs which are being run in our system. So moving forward with the information we've received, and I want to make sure that the board and the community does have a good understanding of the impact of enrollment to these increases. I know the state came out and said it's a 4% increase, and indeed it's a 4% increase, but then when you start to look at some of the push and pull factors, when you start to look at when initially what we had projected, and then start to make the necessary adjustments to bring us to what we should have as our base, that actually involves some lost revenue. So when we pulled everything and we looked at our adjusted average daily membership based on what we initially projected, which is when you start to take elementary and secondary enrollment and how the state calculated using a weighted average for the secondary, we have 7,015 pupil units. When you start to look at the actual numbers which we started getting, after school opened and there's a movement of students in and out of the system. Right now, we have 6,502 as reported. So there's a shift of about 513 pupil units. It's not 513 students, but the way the state calculates that. So when you add all those components and you factor in a 4% and you put into consideration that lost in enrollment and lost revenue, our actual increase is about 3%. And I just want to make sure that the board and the community does have an understanding that we are actually looking at a 3% instead of an actual 4%, which the state is allocating. So here's some of the breakdowns of based on information we have right now, as well as based on some of the calculations, which are really driven by enrollment and the adjusted average daily membership. Some of this information will change as we go into the year and start getting the actual information around how many students are coming. I know there's a lot of work which is happening across our system in terms of trying to attract more students into the system. So as we get more information, some of these numbers may change. But based on what we have right now, our basic allowance revenue increase is $1,957,230, which is based off of that 4% adjusted to about 3%. We have declining enrollment, in addition, $39,932. Compensatory revenue, an additional $247,725. English learners, an additional $296,414. Operating capital, an additional $14,234. Transportation, an additional $106,660. And I just want to mention that some of these dollars are actually categorical, meaning that they can be used for what the state has specified to be their usage, so they can't just be moved in different directions. So, for example, English learners, we already cross-subsidize English learners currently, so we'll be able to probably move these dollars depending with what the plan looks like after we consult with different stakeholders. So right now, it's from a preliminary, just under the general aid regular, we are looking at in addition revenue increase of $2,661,395. We also have the cross-subs for special ed, which is probably the biggest increase we have received in a while, of $3,534,353. So again, since this information just came out, we are working with different stakeholders in identifying the best way we can allocate the resources and hopefully maybe free up resources for certain areas which didn't get enough resources during the first budget iteration. So as we're meeting with different leaders every Thursday, like the superintendent mentioned, we started asking them to bring forth what they feel they really are lacking in the buildings based on what had been allocated, and we started costing. So some of the things we've been looking at, for example, when we did the preliminary budget, we factored in a 3% cost of living adjustment. And based on some of the negotiations and meetings we are having with different unions, we modeled like, okay, what does it look like if we do, if we move from a 3% to 5%? So that amounts to about $1,859,000, which we'll have to figure out like, where does this fit in? Because if you take a $1.9 million basic allowance revenue and you factor in a $1.8 million additional cost of living adjustment, that's a wash. Those dollars are pretty gone. And we also pulled information from buildings around any additional resources they may need across our different programs and systems. And we costed that, and we came up with about $1.7 million of additional resources which may be needed, either additional, teachers or additional counselors or the sub-budget, things like that. And then we also factored in some district-wide allocations around athletics and transportation, about $400,000. So when I add everything up, I get a little over $4 million just on the general fund side of things. So we just have to figure out now, like, what are the priorities and how do we move forward in terms of making sure that any additional needs are met with some of the dollars coming into the system. So that is what I have for the general fund. The other components I will probably put into the space around food services. Again, food services, we know it's always been discussed in the last few meetings around the universal meals going into next year. Currently, we are budgeting a revenue at $3,961,042, and expenditures at $3,890,878, for a surplus of about $70,164, which will go into fund balance. We'll do another round before we bring everything back again to the board on June 6th. For community education, based on programs Alex and his team, Director Fisher and his team have been running, we are budgeting revenue at $11,101,326 and expenditures at $11,064,462, for a surplus of $36,863. That is what I have for our first read for the budget, and we'll be presenting this information again at the regular board meeting. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Director Chapin-Duke. I'll open it up to all of you. First, I have a few, but I'll save them.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Trero, on slide 13, we show a increase in between the base and the proposed of about, well, almost $3 million, $2.6 million difference there. What kind of, that assumes what kind of funding increase percentage-wise from the state?
So, and again, yeah, this kind of gets confusing in the sense like when you look at the base. So when the state does the calculation, and they're saying 4%. Let's say if our adjusted ADM had set down at like 7,015, because at 7,015, our general education aid was 81,039,851. But
Yeah.
then when we started to see the numbers coming in, and we started to see a decline in the number of students and enrollment, the adjustment is that rate which you see of about 1,405,000 between the base and between the base which we had reported as projected and the actual base. So there's a negative of about 1.7%, which we have to start from. And then when we add a 4%, when we are starting with a negative of 1.7, that's where you see that it's actually net of like 3% increase instead of 4% increase, if that makes sense.
All right.
And it's enrollment that's driving that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is enrollment that's
Right.
driving that. Otherwise, I mean, we would have seen a true 4% if we had maintained enrollment at what we had initially projected.
Chair Westmoreland,
Yes.
another question.
Sure.
There were a record number of mandates in the omnibus bill that passed. I heard the number 55 being thrown out. Do we know yet what the cost of those unfunded mandates to the district are going to be?
Not yet. I think there's a lot of information floating around. So we're planning to be attending some sessions which are being hosted by different groups to get more information. I did have a meeting with other directors of business services from surrounding school district late last week, just to brainstorm on what this means. Honestly, we don't have all the details.
Yeah.
I've been going through the legislative document, trying to pull some information out there. It's still very open. So that's one thing we just have to be very careful and cognizant of in terms of like what this would mean from a budgetary perspective. There might be some front loading of dollars, but they are like one time. So after that, what's going to happen? And I know one area which is kind of trending is unemployment. So we are trying to get more information on what that would mean going into the future. But we haven't really costed anything because the information is still vague.
You've had 5 days to do this. Thank you.
Because I'm like barely keeping up with the bill tracker, like what are they doing there? I had a question kind of, related to Steve's. He was asking about unfunded mandates. We also know that we received some additional funding to close our two cross subsidies, the ELL, English Language Learner cross subsidy, and the special education cross subsidy, as you indicated on slide 14. Do you have an estimate of like what percentage that covers for us of that cross subsidy here in Hopkins? Like how much of a dent it makes is what I'm
Sure.
looking for.
What I can say, so for example, with special ed, we are receiving a $3.5 million increase, which is about 31% based on what we've received. So In normal circumstances, our special ed education budget runs around about 17 million. So when you look at what we've been funded in the past, about 10.9 million, and then a $17 million budget, and it is always hovered around, about sometimes 65 to 35 cross subs, sometimes 60 to 40. So with a 31% increase, it will probably close it to maybe 15, 20%, where the district is using general fund to cover up any difference. Because now that's going to mean if we go with like a $17 million budget for special ed, and we are getting special education funding of almost $40 million, that will leave us with a gap of about $3 million, yeah.
So still a gap, but a substantial decrease in the gap.
True.
And then what about English language learners?
So English language learners, right now, what we cross-subsidize for that is close to about $1 million before these dollars came in. So if you add another close to $300,000, that reduces it to about $700,000. So probably maybe it's in the 60-40 range compared to what has happened in the past year.
Thank you.
Chair Westmoreland?
Yes.
There's a couple of references throughout, and I don't know which of you two want to field this one, about kind of enhancing or, the predictable staffing 2.0. When we first moved into predictable staffing, we had a pretty good breakdown of what those allocations were going to look like at each school. Do we have, or will the board be receiving information about what these enhancements or 2.0 predictable staffing model is going to look like at the individual buildings, like we did for the first round?
School by school?
Just, it gave us an idea of if you have X number of students, you'll have this many counselors or this many administrators. We had a pretty good breakdown of what the predictable staffing model brought to each individual school. Just curious if we'll get that sort of color with these enhancements or predictable staffing 2.0 that we've had reference to.
Yeah, and we've been sharing that information with building leaders. So what we did this year, so we did an exercise where we said to leaders, okay, can you give us like your best model, like what you would want to see if you want to run your building smoothly? Can you look at the numbers and give us the ranges you feel like this is what will address my needs in the building? And we call that predictable staffing model 3.0. And then we took that and we went and costed it. And then we brought it back to leaders because obviously they changed the ranges for adult to students. They also changed, some of the formulas in terms of how many counselors may be needed in a building. But what that did, based on information we had at that point in time, it led to buildings not getting any discretionary dollars. And then buildings decided that, you know what, we would rather go with a predictable staffing model 2.0, which is what we actually used for the current year to iterate at least the first budget allocations. So that information, we have it. It has been shared by building leaders, but I don't know to what extent, to be honest with you, Director Peterson. We've used the same ratios as we have used for the current year. Because what that did, it just, considering that there was the 6-9 transition, the enrollment numbers were different from what we've seen in the past because of the fact that students are moving from building to building. So building leaders were comfortable with maintaining the ratios the way they've been allocated for this year, or at least we gather more information going into next year. But we can provide you that information. We do have all that here.
Because that'll change based on the increases from the state, like kind of the final building by building numbers, right?
So what might happen, and again, these are conversations we'll have to have in terms of what are the priorities. So the way we've built the predictable staffing model so that we don't come back and, break things apart is any additional dollars which are coming in, they are calculated based on the discretionary. So if we receive additional dollars, we use the discretional formula, which definitely would maybe reduce the number of maybe class sizes or the number of additional support staff we may need in a building. And that's the reason why we built the predictable staffing model the way it is, so that there's this flexibility in case we get additional dollars without really breaking everything and having staff move. So we just use the formula, we just use the number of students coming in. Because let's say with our current, which is what we used for any discretionary dollars, what we call basic pay students. So after we'd allocated all the resources for predictable staffing model and for departments, any remaining dollars were divided by the total number of students to get us a allocation per student, which for the current allocations was $506. So let's say we get, because we know now we've gotten an additional $1.9 million in basic allowance. If we decide that we are taking these dollars back into the total dollar package back into the building, we are going to divide 1.9 million by the total number of students, which increases the discretionary dollar per each student. And then buildings will have to figure out, based on some of these priorities, what needs to be covered.
So I think it would be helpful to see that building by building breakdown in advance of the final budget approval, just so that we understand kind of what those allocations look like. And that's what I'm hearing you say as well, Director Peterson.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing a lot of, information coming our way that really does tend to be broken down on a building by building basis. So being able to view those numbers, I think, would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, no, we have all that information, so we'll provide it.
And then process-wise, tonight at the meeting, we'll be approving the preliminary budget that does not yet include our allocations from the state. Of course, it's in the presentation, so we have an idea of what we're getting, but it hasn't been integrated yet. And then on June 6th, we'll be doing that final budget approval. Is that the expected timeline?
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chair Westmoreland, just a process note. I know we just worked on the policy, and maybe Nick can speak to it, but correct me if I'm wrong, we actually can't, because we didn't receive the preliminary budget, we can't vote on it based on policy, can we? Because we were required to have any information that was votable, at least, I believe it was 3 days before, per policy. Right? So, Nick, can you speak to that? Because we just went through that policy, right?
So the specific documents you're referencing?
The document that we went through where the amount of business days we needed to have information when we were voting at the table on a particular item?
Yes, if that is the, and I can look and reference it as well. That is the board material. It's in the 200 series. I'll pull up the number, but it does state that you do need to have the materials specific days in advance in order to have the opportunity to review them, in order then to be able to vote and approve at the meeting.
Right, so I just want to be aware of that, because if we can't, and maybe we have to take a vote to override that, but I know that policy requires a certain amount of business days to have the information, so just that.
Yeah, and I don't
something to look
think,
into.
so this is the first read. I don't think it requires an actual vote. The vote is required at the June 6th meeting.
Okay, so we aren't voting on it today.
So then, then I think we're fine. And Elise, if you could update that agenda item in the meeting packet just so that it's clear that we're not voting on that tonight, that it'll be a board information and discussion item. And then we will do that final vote on June 16th, and we'll make sure that we have. I'm sorry,
Sixth.
I apologize, I was
Yep.
adding days, on June 6th. And we'll make sure that we have that information at least 3 days ahead of time per policy to be able to vote on it.
May I ask one follow-up question to this kind of building by building breakdown? We've heard from a variety of groups at the board table over the last couple months about some site-specific, some building-specific, even some program-specific funding and staffing questions. Do you have a loose time frame? Because a lot of our parents and families are very invested in those issues. Do you have kind of a loose time frame or a goal, understanding that it's very complex and everyone is working very hard on it, but a time when you might be able to say, like, I know we're going to vote on the budget, and then it's my understanding that that budget will be approved, but within that, there still is decisions to be made at the school levels, and the board does not approve school level funding, but is there, coming to my actual question now, is there a goal time frame where parents, families, the many people who have written to us with concerns about programs might expect or listen in for some announcements that they're very vested in?
Sure. I'll attempt to answer, and then the superintendent and Dr. Lightfoot can add on there. So again, right now, because of the fact that we are using projections, as we go into, for example, into July and August, when we start to see the actual numbers coming in, because we also have dollars we've set aside, targeted staffing dollars, which are informed by any additional students coming into the system, which may be used as mitigating on some of these needs across our system. What we are trying to do right now, to the best of our ability, is to at least make sure that buildings are ready to open with at least adequate resources. They may not be enough, but based on information we have, because there's a lot of movement in terms of when we start to see the actual number of students coming into a building versus what has been projected. So from a timeline perspective, I think in July, August, we might start to really see a good picture of how a building is resourced.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, we met with a group of, as has been mentioned, the business and staffing group that meets every Thursday, and we did set up meetings in June and July for those conversations. So they're on the calendar now, and as we have that additional information, we'll be able to use that data to inform those conversations.
And perhaps at this moment, you can't commit to this next question, but is there a pathway that's set so that, I mean, we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of communications from our community. Is there a pathway set for which the community who cares a lot about what's happening to know any type of resolution to these communications we've received? Or maybe resolution's a strong word, but an update?
We're working on a communication for our families and community, hopefully to be sent on Friday, maybe somewhat similar to the Hopkins All message that was sent last Friday. I don't think we have a typical pattern of notifying our community around, super specific staffing decisions, building by building. However, as Teruro mentioned, our leaders are currently analyzing where and how they've been able to staff and communicating what they currently experience as unmet needs, which will be taken into consideration. But I think what's going to happen is there might be more need than there are resources, so we'll have to do some prioritizing. So I'm thinking that before mid-June, there could be some additional decisions made. And then, as Truro mentioned, into July and August, that's where we look at additional students coming into the system so that resources from the targeted staffing allocation can also be applied, and those would be additional resources depending on what surfaces at each building. So it's somewhat of a tenuous process that we try to engage in and navigate as thoughtfully and intentionally as possible. And we just want to be super careful around that balance of being transparent with our community without providing so much detail without the proper context that then has, folks maybe spiraling in unnecessary or unhealthy ways. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. I think we just kind of had nearly unprecedented since the COVID, the true COVID emergency first broke. We've had almost unprecedented numbers of community interaction around this topic of concern about the programs. And in light of that was the spirit of me asking that question. So it's good to know that it's on the forefront of the mind, and certainly that message around there are very many needs is an important one.
And definitely the concerns are in the forefront of our thinking and on our radar almost every moment of our working days and maybe nights.
Yes.
So I'm mindful of time. We have kind of dipped into our meeting time here, and I also know that board members need a break. So let's plan to meet back here at 7:10 to start our regular meeting. Thank you very much, Director Chapanduka. We will pick up this conversation again during our regular meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
It just
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Hopkins School Board, which is called to order at 7:11 p.m. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to our community members who have joined us here in the physical space, as well as those who are joining us via the YouTube live stream. So as has been our practice this school year, we will go around the table and introduce ourselves. We have two of our fabulous student board representatives here with us this evening, and I'm laughing so I don't cry because it's the last time they're going to be with us. So we will let them introduce themselves during their reports. We'll start with you, Director Peterson.
Ooh, thanks. Hi, my name is Katie O'Shea Peterson. I am in my 4th year on the board and am the parent of a 5th and 6th grader, soon to be 6th and 7th graders at North Middle School.
Steve Adams. Oh, should I go next?
Yes, please.
Steve Adams, I'm in my 12th year on the board. Proud parent of 2 grown adults, adult children who attended the Hopkins School District K through 12.
Good evening, Rhoda Marie Puri-Reed, Superintendent of Schools. I have a 5th grader here at Eisenhower. She'll be at West next year, and a 9th grader at North who will be at our high school next year. And my husband has a son who is a kindergarten para at Eisenhower Elementary.
Jen Westmoreland, she, her pronouns. I am in the middle of my 2nd term on the Hopkins School Board. I currently serve as chair. I am a proud graduate of Hopkins High School and currently the parent of a 6th grader at Eisenhower Xingjing Juntos.
Welcome, everyone. Hi, my name is Shannon Andreessen. I am in my 4th year serving on the school board, and I parent 2 children. The eldest is a recent grad attending the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and I have a 15-year-old at West Junior High.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Khan. I have lived about 12 years in this district very happily. I chose it on purpose because I was so blessed to be in a community where multiculturalism and multi-ethnic families were recognized and celebrated. My children both graduated from Hopkins. They are currently attending the University of Minnesota. And yeah, I love Hopkins. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. My name is Jason Russ. I have 2 4th graders and 1 1st grader, and all 3 of them attend Tanglin Elementary.
Thank you. So our next agenda item is open agenda. This is one of 2 times during our meetings when we hear public comment from you, our community members. This period is for items on the agenda. And there are 2 options for giving public comment. You can leave a voicemail before the meeting begins. There are instructions for how to do that in the board packet that's on the school board page of the website. Or you can attend in person, fill out a public comment card, and hand it to me before the meeting begins. We received 1 voicemail tonight. It is for an item that is not on the agenda, and so that public comment period will happen at the end of the meeting, and we'll play the voicemail at that time. And I did not receive any public comment cards this evening. So we will move to our student board representatives' reports.
Okay, I'll go first. Hello, everyone. I'm Isabella, the senior cohort coordinator. So the seniors are just about done. We're inching closer to the end of the school year, and I want to commemorate the 2023 class for all of their hard work. There is a checklist for us to complete before we can get our cap and gowns, including a senior survey, turning in materials, and paying any fees. The senior party is June 2nd, which I, along with my graduating class, look forward to. One of my favorite things to look at is both the senior wall and the college commitment Instagram. It is a very meaningful moment for seniors, and they can see where other people are going. It has been a great way of connecting students and keeping our sense of community. Recently, I had the pleasure of taking part in the junior induction ceremony for National Honor Society. As president, I helped read some of the pillars aloud, highlighted the important work they will be doing next year. It was a great send-off, and I cannot wait to see what next year holds in terms of leadership and community. The board has also taken a focus towards health and wellness in the past few months. A lot of different aspects were brought up, such as food, mental health, inclusivity, attendance, and a lot more. Students and staff have been working hard to alleviate issues and make students' school days overall better. We will continue to implement policies that benefit everyone and help us build a positive and safe space. I just want to let our community know that we value and have these conversations often, and hopefully some of these changes will be seen within the next school year. I'll also let Oscar speak on the rest of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Oscar Wolf. I am a senior student board representative, and I can't believe this is the last one. Over the past 2 years, there has been a lot of progress in a lot of areas. Jewish and Muslim students no longer have to skip school to observe their holidays. Extracurriculars are more accessible to join and create your own than they ever have been before. And I believe that we've seen a big increase in civic participation from students. There have been multiple points throughout the year where something has happened at the high school and students have actually come to board meetings to speak. And while it may not have been a good thing that prompted them to come in the first place, the fact that they did come shows that they believe that the system set up to hear them out actually will do that. When I'm here, I'm not speaking on behalf of myself. I'm speaking on behalf of the students that I represent. And I have a responsibility to those students to share information, whether that be good or bad. As some of you may know, in AP Statistics, the final project of the year is to do your own statistical survey. I decided not to go the fun route for this project and ask about candy preferences or hygiene habits. I decided to do essentially a poll of approval ratings for administration at the high school. Let me give a disclaimer before I get into it. This is by no means a perfect, comprehensive statistical survey. It is absolutely a convenient sample. It is based on the people who responded to a poll that I solely was advertising. So please do keep that in mind. That being said, it is a sample size of well over 100 students. I took out any responses that were not from Hopkins students, so these numbers really should be seriously considered. Here is exactly how I phrased the question. Do you approve or disapprove of the job administration has done running Hopkins High School? That was it. There were 3 polls, one for seniors and one for juniors. That was what I did for statistics. And then when I realized that this would probably be useful information, I did one more poll of overall. So here are the numbers. Among seniors, the approval rate was 9.6%, meaning seniors disapprove of administration at a rate of 90.4%. Among juniors, the numbers were actually even worse. The approval rate was 5.3%, and the disapproval rate was 94.7%. Overall, the approval rate that students have at the high school towards administration is 5.9%, meaning the overall disapproval of Hopkins High School administration is 94.1% among students. There's not really a way around these numbers. They are very, very low, and I think that they point to a pretty deep divide that we have between students and administration. I didn't ask why students selected the answers they did, but I think that there are a lot of possible explanations we could point to, including the poor communication, a lack of follow-through, a general feeling of condescension, or just a feeling that administration isn't fully aware of the reality of what's happening outside of the front office. These numbers do demonstrate that there's a problem, but I also see a huge opportunity here. I don't think there has been a better time to address this problem than now. We have freshmen coming to the high school. The student population is going to increase more than it has in many, many years. So I think that now is a fantastic opportunity to start improving those numbers. Now, with all of that being said, I am completely a product of Hopkins schools. I went to kindergarten through 6th grade at Meadowbrook, I went to junior high at North, and I went to high school at Hopkins for the past 3 years. I am beyond excited about what's going to happen for me in the next 4 years and beyond, and I credit Hopkins a lot for that, and I think a lot of other seniors do as well. As I leave this role, I'm very proud of the work that has been done, but I am also aware, and I hope that everyone else here is too, of the problems that are still to be overcome. I want to give a final note on the program of being a student board representative. If you are a student who has watched these meetings or is watching now, I would absolutely encourage you to apply. This is a really meaningful and influential role that genuinely allows students to have a voice in the workings of the district. And if you're a parent who's watching this, I would encourage you to encourage your student to apply. But this program is small, so if it doesn't end up being the right fit, there are so many more ways to get involved at Hopkins. Join our Legislative Action Coalition. Run for student council. Start your own group. The button is now on the page. It's very accessible. This has been the most fulfilling role I have ever served in. It has been extremely educational, and it has been an incredible opportunity that I will not forget as I pursue my future endeavors. It has been an honor to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I want to open up the opportunity for my colleagues to ask any questions about the content of your reports, and then I'll turn it over to Director Khan, who serves as our student board rep liaison, to offer some words. So first, any questions about what Isabella and Oscar shared with us tonight, or comments?
Chair Westmoreland, I have
Yes.
a comment. With all due respect, I think if you had taken that poll when I graduated from high school 55 years ago, you'd get the same result. So I think students' view of administration is somewhat jaundiced typically, but I'm also curious. I know, Oscar, you're going to Columbia next year. Isabel, what are your plans?
I'll be at Loyola in New Orleans, Louisiana.
All
I'm very
right.
excited for that.
All right, excellent.
Thank you.
Those are my comments and questions, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you sharing the information from the survey. I'm wondering, I think we've had some really great conversations over the past year here about some of the specific issues that you outlined in your report that might be leading to some of these responses. And you mentioned different ways that students can get involved in leadership, which is so important. And though that only works if we as adults center and listen to student voices and develop processes for both hearing the feedback, integrating it, and then coming full circle to talk about, what we did based on the conversation, right? And so I appreciate hearing this, and I appreciate how both of you have brought hard truths to this board table and have never hesitated to tell us what's going on, not just from your perspective, but from the voices of your colleagues at Hopkins at the high school as well. So thank you. And I'll turn it over. Oh, other questions or comments before I turn it over to Director Khan? I just don't want to forget to do that part. Director Andreessen.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to quickly say that you have brought so much to this board table, and that your voices and the ways in which you advocate for other students and also to make Hopkins a better place is so appreciated, and I couldn't be prouder to be a board colleague of yours. I've been so impressed with your service and advocacy. So I'm going to stop so I don't cry.
Thank you, Director Khan.
So I purposefully kind of vied for this position to be to be the head of this, to be the liaison for our wonderful student board representatives. And what was remarkable about both of you and, in fact, all of our student board reps is that you all went through a difficult time through COVID. You were able to still be in all kinds of proactive leadership roles and then reintegrate yourselves back into this system. And I have to say, I truly find that inspirational. And you always have had a positive attitude despite all these adversities you both have had to face. So I'm so honored to be, I feel like you need to lead this someday for sure, or something bigger, I'm sure. But I just have such a feeling of honor and true admiration for you both. Isabella, I think you had this wonderful ability. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring up my notes here because I'm doing this on the spur of the moment. So Isabella, I remember, first of all, you both have been honored for the Youth Caring Awards. And Isabella, I really love that you have been, besides a school board representative, you have also led our school board reps and have had wonderful communication skills and organization skills, despite this balance of many activities you've been part of, such as a nonprofit organization with Minnesota teen activists, you tutor students at school, and you've also been president of the National Honor Society and a lot more. So, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around how you've been able to do that. So thank you for your service, and I'm sure you're going to go on to do great things. And Oscar, I mean, are there any words? Like, I have to say, God bless you both, but I'm so proud of the fact that you have, spoken truth to power. And I really admire that even subjects that have been a bit uncomfortable, I have to admit, you tackled head on. Even I'm like, should I say this? Should I say that? Will they be offended? But I love how you are very factual. I feel that you're non-accusatory in the manner in which you speak. You're just like, here's the problem, here is what I think the solution would be, and here is how we can address it to the best of our capacity. And I love that problem-solving ability of yours and the way you took the lead to stand up for your fellow Jewish students and even Muslim students to make sure that we got those holidays on the calendar, and you were so wonderfully articulate. So thank you both, and I am amazingly proud of you. I feel very emotional. I'm not gonna cry, but I feel very emotional to let you go. I sincerely hope you'll be able to come back sometime and give us updates about amazing things you're doing. So a round of applause for our lovely students. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Director Khan.
Yeah.
Next, we'll move on to our superintendent's report with Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland, and good evening to everyone. Before I begin, I also would like to address Isabella and Oscar and truly thank you for not just your presence, but your student leadership at the board table, to be committed to attending an evening meeting every other Tuesday night, and also to have the courage to speak your truth in the midst of so many adults is something that we admire about each of you. And I thank you for your service, and I know that you're going to do great things in the future, and we're going to be reading about you in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And then, ever since your recent remarks, Oscar, have been just in the last few minutes thinking about what you shared. And I want to both thank you for sharing your perspective and the perspective of the students you surveyed, and really uphold that as something that we must honor and listen to. And I think about the difficulty of leadership, especially change leadership, and how suspicious, really, as human beings, we are of authority. And I just want to maybe sort of calm my nerves and encourage all of us there are many leaders in this physical space here tonight where when we hear something like that, we do have to lean into the difficulty of that. And we do have to grapple with, why is it that some of our students might feel that way? What can be done differently? And what are some of the important change or improvement moves that we have to hold on to and keep persisting with, because soon we'll see the brighter side. So I'm trying to just really sit in that space and think about what you said, and I'm mindful of Principal Ballard in the audience who had to listen to that, and also will need to lean into the difficulty of that and figure out what is that true partnership with students. What does that look like, so that throughout and in the end, students have a sense that they are listened to and the decisions that are collectively made reflect what's best for the vast majority of stakeholders in that space. So thank you. All right. Well, my report is going to offer some brighter highlights, actually. So, it's the end of the year where there are a lot of celebratory, reflective, exciting things happening. I don't know if you knew that llamas visited Hopkins Public Schools. I did not know that. But yes, last week, llamas came to Tanglin Elementary through an organization called Carlson's Lovable Llamas. They brought 6 llamas to students to walk, feed, pet, and hug. And this activity was organized by our parent-teacher organization, our PTO at Tanglin. And students so adored the llamas that they wanted them to come back the very next day. Also, at Tanglin Elementary, so this is the season of end-of-year field trips. So I was at Tanglin actually all day yesterday shadowing Dr. Haybison, our school principal. So yes, I am taking time during this very busy season to shadow each of our school principals for a day, and also to shadow each member of my cabinet team. And it just gives me insights into the work of all of our leaders, gives me lots of face time and opportunities to interact with our school staff and with our students, and to learn, some of the details of what's happening across our school spaces. So yesterday at Tanglin, I learned that 5th and 6th graders went to Skateville in Burnsville to have their end-of-year field trip. And what the teachers noticed is that some of the students who are typically shy were skating effortlessly and helping their more outgoing peers, some of whom had never skated before. So they saw a lot of kids helping each other. And then the gentleman in white that you see there is Nate Taylor. He's a custodian at Tanglin. He loves roller skating, loves kids, so he was really in his element yesterday. Also wanted to share that recently we hosted step-up days at our 2 soon-to-be middle schools. So what happens is, thankfully, our 7th, 8th, and 9th graders have a day off, and they create literally the physical space for 5th and 6th graders to spend about 4 hours in the school learning the space and starting to maybe experience what it might feel like to transition from class to class, where their lockers are going to be, where their teachers are going to be located, and there's a lot of fun that's organized throughout. And so one of the reasons we do a step-up day is because transitioning from one grade level to the next or one school to the next is a really important component of a student's overall experience in school. If we can facilitate effective and successful transitions, then we're setting students and staff up for success. So we do take those preparatory opportunities very seriously. Also wanted to share that we're very proud of our 9th graders at both West and North junior highs. So one of the culminating pieces of International Baccalaureate is the community projects. And so our scholars study all kinds of issues, whether local to our community or a serious dilemma in the global space. They study an important issue and do a lot of research, and then present information about that issue and also their perspectives on how to solve some of these challenges and problems that we face in our world. And so some of the highlights, I saw an email from one of our IB coordinators to the whole staff just celebrating the really interesting features of these students' projects. They researched police brutality, visited the George Floyd Memorial. They created fantastic events for students on this action night, advocated for disability awareness, and because there's so many visitors in this space, they also learned a little bit about managing excited crowds and perhaps gaining empathy for teachers who have to do the same thing. And this next slide here, I wanted to highlight some secondary scholars. So you'll see on the left, we have 4 students, Chloe Bushman, I hope I'm pronouncing all of these names correctly, Miles Harris. Miles is actually, he's the son of one of our high school science teachers, and he's also an intern here in our business services department. He's a really great kid. So Chloe, Miles, Zoe Lipschultz, and George Liu were named the state champions at this year's personal finance decathlon at Securian Financial in St. Paul. This team developed a financial plan based on a case study for a fictional family where they developed a financial plan to help the family meet their goals. They presented their plan to a panel of real-life financial planners who evaluated how well they managed debt, income, spending, saving, investing, and risk to put the family in a successful financial position. So this team is going to be traveling to Ohio very soon, where they will compete for the national championship. And then on the right, you'll see a photo of the Hopkins adapted bowling team, who really had quite the season. They came home from the state competition with 2 awards. The doubles team of Clayton Carlson and Nolan Hilson are the new adapted bowling state doubles champions. And Grace Frenchmiller from West Junior High was the state runner-up in the individual tournament. So congratulations to this entire adapted bowling team for a great season. Now, this is something really special. I would love everybody in this space to go to our high school and visit the class of 2023 Scholar Wall. So what Principal Ballard and Dr. Kuhl, who is our college and career specialist, are working on is an opportunity to feature each individual senior as they solidify their post-secondary plans. So as you can see, the wall is beginning to fill up with hundreds of our current seniors, and each frame is color-coded according to Minnesota State college or university, out-of-state institution, gap year experiences abroad, military placements, and I think career placements might be the other category. So it's really, I literally had goosebumps when I was walking back and forth in front of this wall, just looking at all of the fantastic places that our students are going to end up. And actually, I was dictating into my phone. I was reading all of the names of the out-of-state institutions out loud because I wanted to see how many different out-of-state places our students are going to, and the list was really, really, really long. In addition to a number of kids going to the University of Minnesota, Macalester, St. Thomas, so on and so forth. So it's a really, it's just marvelous to stand in front of there and look at all of our seniors' faces and see where they're going. A district highlight, oh, no, well, sort of. A secondary and district highlight. Okay, so this is a photograph of some of our students who engaged in a restorative justice circle with officers from the Minnetonka Police Department. So this experience was organized by Dr. Persad at our high school, also Ms. Robinson, and Assistant Principal Mr. Ward. And this was the first of what is many conversations to follow. So there were other pictures. You could actually see the officers and students in a circle engaging in conversation around lots of different issues. So really glad to see these conversations taking place. And I wanted to share with our folks in the audience here that we have a number of district office staff who have been working truly hard all year on some really important things. So we recently hosted a cookout for our colleagues. Thanks to Elise for helping to organize. Thanks to our Director of Business Services for helping to organize. But we're recognizing our staff for a heavy lift with the district-wide audit. We have so much important work happening with open enrollment, which is almost exclusively a one-woman shop, Julie Katzmarek. All of the posting and the hiring that our HR professionals are engaged in. We have a number of people preparing for the new ERP, Enterprise Resource Platform or program, but essentially it is a software system that will help us manage our business and HR operations, and it's probably going to be a 2-year implementation, so lots of work going into that. Our IT staff were invited to this. Our buildings and ground staff were recognized. So there's just lots of work happening to support teaching and learning in all of our schools, and we appreciate all of our operations staff. And then finally, we had a special visit from Education Commissioner Willie Jett this morning. He swung by Eisenhower Elementary to read to a group of 4th graders in Miss Gruss's class. Apparently, he has a goal of visiting every single school in the state of Minnesota, which is, if he is able to accomplish that, it'll be huge because there are more than 2,000 schools in the state of Minnesota. So that's it for the report, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Peary Reed. Lots of exciting things happening, as usual. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? We'll move into our agenda approval. I just wanted to note something for the board before we approve the agenda. On the consent calendar, it's item D, the District 287 Long-Term Facilities Maintenance Resolution. So that resolution was uploaded in not within that 5-day period as defined by policy. It also requires a roll call vote and needs to go on to new business. And so we're going to be moving that to new business for June 6th. So I wanted to note that before we do the overall agenda approval. So with that in mind, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion, and is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. Expenses of note this time include charges for 513 diplomas, which tells us we're getting close to graduation. 400 diploma covers and only 150 tassels. So I'm hoping that someone has a stash at the high school for additional diploma covers and tassels. $560 for Chinese language testing. Numerous charges for substitute teachers across the district. We've really had to rely on them a lot this year. numerous charges for outsourced nursing services that we provide to our students as well as students of other non-public schools. $8,149.91 to various booster groups and PTOs for their commissions for working the concession stand at various events. And finally, $290 for porta potties at the high school, since we have so many athletic fields in use right now. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $1,129,880.72 for the period of May 4th, 2023 through May 17, 2023.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Treasurer Adams. Next, we'll move into new business. Our first agenda item is the long-term facilities maintenance plan update, and I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed as we welcome Director Chapanduka and Director Newman to the table.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. So the long-term facilities maintenance revenue program is guided by Minnesota statute, and our plan is required to be annually presented to our school board and then sent to MDE for approval. So I welcome our Director of Business Services to the table, Taruro Chapanduka, and our Supervisor of Buildings and Grounds, Kevin Newman, and also Dave Gibson and Jake Burke, and we'll have them present some information to our school board and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Mary Perry. Good evening, Chair Westmoreland, respective board members, and the community at large. Today we'll be presenting our long-term facility maintenance plan, which is required by Minnesota Department of Education. So this plan will be touching some of the work we've done and what was presented to the board last year with a few changes. With me, I have Mr. Kevin Newman, our Supervisor of Buildings and Grounds, Facilities Operations, and Mr. Jack Begg from Site Logic, as well as Mr. Dave Gibson. So what I'll do is I'll have the opportunity for Mr. Newman to give us an overview with our facilities capital plan, and Mr. Begg to take us through the plan, and then we'll take any questions from the board.
Greetings, everyone. It is always a pleasure to come before the board and show some of the projects that we'll be doing in maintaining our facilities here at Hopkins Public Schools. And this year is no different. We have an aggressive construction schedule for this summer. We do a 2-year bonding, and this year we're in a non-bonding year. So, but it's a very busy year at Hopkins. We'll be doing projects at the high school, at Glen Lake, and also Meadowbrook East building, which will be coming online this fall, which we're very excited about, which has been there for a long time, and the city of Golden Valley will appreciate the use, as will the district. So again, a reminder that this is the first year of a 2-year bonding cycle, and again, it's one where we really appreciate the forward thinking of our families, of our communities that invest in our district in this way, which is unusual for the majority of school districts, so that when our students come to our schools, they come to a school that is well maintained, aesthetically pleasing, and safe. And it's something to be very proud of at Hopkins, the foresight and leadership that the district has shown over the years and how that's benefited, especially in the COVID, post-COVID, how well our schools got through that, and a lot of it had to do with the quality and the maintenance of our equipment and things of that. So again, just very appreciative to the Hopkins community in their investment in their education of their children. So at this time, I'll pass over to Jake Berg of SiteLogic to go through this year's long-term facility maintenance plan.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to the board and Superintendent Mary Perry Reed, Director Chapanduka, and again, Kevin. Very honored and privileged to serve the district and to be here representing SiteLogic tonight to talk through the LTFM plan. I wanted to begin with just a quick review of past phases. Kevin mentioned a little bit of this, but the district historically plans in phases. Looking back over the past little over 20 years, the district has spent nearly over $170 million into their facilities in terms of maintaining and upkeep on their facilities. And I just want to recognize again, how good stewards the districts have been of these public resources and assets. They're in very good shape. As we look at the previous phases, you'll see 8 phases laid out there on the screen. We are currently in phase 9, as Kevin Newman shared, in year 2 of that, so a non-bonding year. Next slide, please. Right now, I wanted to briefly cover kind of the estimated project costs. So we are in, projects are planned in calendar years, so 2023, 2024. The school district operates in fiscal years. We're looking at projects in calendar year 2024, certifying this year with the Minnesota Department of Education for just over $6.2 million. You'll see on the left table there that the fiscal year costs are well above that $6.2 million, about $13 million. Those are the costs from calendar year projects. The majority of those costs are from calendar year project 2023. So the fiscal year costs lag about a year behind the calendar year. Next, looking at the 10-year plan. Each year, MDE asks every district to submit a 10-year long-term facilities maintenance plan. This year is no different. The plan has not changed significantly since we were here at this time last year, other than you'll see 2023 has come on the end of there. We look out as SiteLogic and the district's partner. We plan on a longer-term horizon, if you can believe it, than 10 years. We actually look out 20 to even 30 years in terms of the district's infrastructure to ensure that there are no surprises and things are planned for and accounted for well in advance. Next slide, please. Here you'll see the projects broken down over the course of the 10-year plan by category. So MDE has a set of finance codes or project categories that all of the projects are classified in. I wanted just to point out, if you look at the bottom row, you'll see categories like building envelope, electrical, mechanical systems, and you see a very even distribution of projects across there. So again, pointing to the district being good stewards of all of the resources within the buildings, really kind of equitably tackling infrastructure projects as they come up. Some of the gaps there you'll see as roofing. That's because roofing has a much longer life cycle. Typically, the roofs that are installed have a almost 30-year lifespan. So that's why you'll see some gaps in there. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at the same 10-year expenditure plan, but looking at it more by building. Then this is again by calendar year. So we're going into 2024, where we had previously planned the $6.2 million. And just a little look ahead into potentially the next phase, phase 10, that will be coming to next year. And what's planning. And of course, as any planning document, they are fluid as needs and priorities change within the district. Things change around in there a little bit. However, we don't expect any substantial shifts in there. So just wanted to kind of point out the long-term planning horizon of that. We are working with district leadership currently already on planning and prioritizing for Phase 10. That work begins well in advance. Well, thank you. I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Kevin. Alice, can you go to the next slide? So the next slide is just showing the debt structure. So when we maintain our facilities, we use a combination of funds. Some of the funds are coming from the general fund, as pay as you go. Some of the funds are through the bonds, and some of the funds are tied to the lease levy. So that graph is just showing the outlay of how we try to maintain our debt service so that it doesn't overwhelm our taxpayers. So the general fund component, it's part of our levy, so it comes to the district on a yearly basis. And then we try to leverage those dollars with any of the funds we bond for, which are managed through our debt service and impacting property taxes. So right now, we work with our partners at Ehlers just to make sure that we are maintaining a structure which is more stable and flexible for us not to overwhelm our tax base with more debt. So these projects, as mentioned here by Kevin and Jack, structured so that we use both our pay-as-you-go as well as our bond funds, which we've already sold and will be coming back again next year with a different plan as we start to look at some of the work we've been doing around facilities and just the new model of education. With that, we'll take any questions from the board.
Well, thank you. Wonderful to have you both back at the table. And yes, as you said, a lot of this looks familiar because we took a look at this last year as well. And so wondering if my board colleagues have any comments or questions. I do have one, but I wanted to open it up first.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
As usual, I have a comment.
Fabulous.
And I just want to say I've always wanted to say this. Hello, Newman.
Hello, Jerry.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed, well, you can tell by looking at our expenses, our projected expenses in previous ones, is that Hopkins spends a kind of a level amount on facilities maintenance every year. And I look at other districts, and they're having like a $150 million bond issuance, you know, a referendum. And what that typically indicates is that they're doing deferred maintenance. And they're putting off maintenance for their facilities until it's absolutely, you know, critical. And I've had the opportunity to walk through the halls of some of those districts, and you can see that they're not keeping them up on a regular basis. So I think it's a testament to our strategy and to our facilities maintenance people that we do this investment on a regular basis, and that we've got projects going all the time to upgrade our facilities. And I think we're being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars and being good stewards for our children so that they have a decent facility to go to every day. So thank you, all of you, for the work that you do to keep our facilities in top-notch form.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adams. Mr. Newman, you mentioned in your introduction that we have an aggressive construction schedule planned for the summer. I love driving around and seeing projects being done over the summer and engaging with our community members and saying, thank you, look, you help us do this, and here is like physical proof that we are using our community investment in our schools wisely by, as Director Adams said, you know, really staying on top of maintenance and also improving our schools and our structures so that they align with how we're teaching today. Because as Director Adams mentioned, I've visited lots of schools throughout Hennepin County over the past year, and when school buildings are neglected, those impacts are compounded over time, right? And then all of a sudden you have these huge problems and you're not able to address them in a cost-efficient way. So with that really, really long introduction to my question, what are some of the highlights that we can look forward to this summer as we are driving around the school district and when we get to go on our tour as school board members in August?
Well, I would say the biggest highlight obviously will be, and yet to be renamed, the Meadowbrook East Building. Third floor will have a state-of-the-art special education. We're moving the program from the pavilion back into our district or into our own buildings. And I know Fonda and Brian Stanley, Fonda Quintera, the special ed coordinator, director, have helped design just some wonderful facilities in a space that was a blank slate. Below, on second floor, will be the new home of virtual EDU for the district, and that will be a huge weight off of Eisenhower, who's been Alex in Community Ed, and the community spaces have been housing the virtual EDU staff for a year, and so I know they are quite looking forward to that. The new parking lot, I don't know why we get excited over parking lots. The new parking lot at Glen Lake will allow us to move to the building of the ADA playground. And with the rules of water, stormwater, a large retention system had to be built prior to the building of the ADA playground. So the timing could not have been more perfect for our school. That's a level 4 school. A large growth in students there with needs. And we will do a small project this fall to begin it. Next summer, you will see the fruition of all of their hard work and activities in raising funds and building a facility we can all be proud of. And then we will see smaller work throughout. All the buildings will get some activity in them this summer. Everything from new sidewalks to new carpeting and paint. So some of the activity will be on the inside and some will be on the outside. But all summer, you should see vans, cranes, and trucks parked all over. So it will be a busy time. And just remember, our buildings don't rest over the summer. Community Ed has a vibrant Camp Royal program and other activities. St. David's will be using part of West Junior High. So even though we'll be doing these activities, we do the dance along with the summer programming that also takes place. So it'll be an exciting summer.
Very, thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions or comments for this team? This is an information and discussion only item. We don't need to take action on this tonight. So if there are no other comments or questions, I'll say thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Have a fun summer.
Thank you for your work.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we'll move on to our budget presentation, and Director Chapman-Ducal will stay with us here at the table, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. So we're going to, again, review the presentation that we shared at our workshop. And what we wanted to do was remain consistent with what we're sharing with Hopkins staff. So we offered two opportunities for staff to gather together virtually, yesterday at 4:30 and then tomorrow at 4:30, just to learn more information about where we are with our district-wide budget, with our staffing, with our resources. and with our preliminary plans for next year. So that was what I thought was a productive learning opportunity and yielded some good questions and discussion. And we wanted our school board and community to have a glimpse into what information is being shared with our staff at this time. So this next slide shows a number of the truly a myriad of budget activities and factors that are all informing our year-long process. So this gives some context to the budgeting process in Hopkins, and a lot of these activities on the left and factors on the right are variables that other districts must also face. But on the left, you'll see some time-bound activities and actions that are engaged in by district and school leaders, including reviewing current against projected enrollment in the early part of the year. Enrollment is a very important factor in the school district's budgeting process because enrollment informs revenue. So we're always looking at enrollment, and that starts right before we launch school and really into October 1st, which is when we send current numbers to the state of Minnesota. We're also partnering with our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, which is a small group of parents and school board members who have financial and accounting expertise. And they are looking at a number of considerations that then inform parameters for the school board members' consideration. We're engaging in district-wide audit during this time to look at actual expenditures and making sure that we're engaging in accurate coding practices. During this time, there's a lot of legislative advocacy. So Hopkins has its own Legislative Action Coalition, LAC for short, and they are a small but mighty team of parents and board members who meet every Friday at 11:30 to talk about what are the needs, what are the funding and policy needs of Hopkins Public Schools, and how might we develop a platform that will help our legislators understand what our students and staff and families need. And then there's also platform development and advocacy happening at the state level. So for example, I sit on the executive board for AMSD, or the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and we develop a platform as well that then informs testimonies and other advocacy efforts at the state level. This year, we, as school principals and district leaders, met weekly with Director Chapanduka and his team's guidance to engage in our really a budgeting process that has extended throughout the entire year. So meeting every Thursday morning from 9 to noon to collaboratively interact with our resources and to make sure that we're really clear on what Vision 2031 calls for, what our strategic plan is articulating, what our students need to achieve academically, socioeconomically, social emotionally, and also what our staff need to really thrive and be effective in the classroom and in the in various district office roles. So there's a lot of discussion and decision-making happening on a weekly basis so that when it really comes time to present preliminary budgets and staffing to school leaders and district department leaders, then it's not rushed. There's been an extensive, thoughtful process. And then, you know, one of the iterations that we really hope to figure out how we can how we can make is to increasingly involve our teachers and our teacher leaders in these discussions and decisions, so that with this idea that everybody's voice is important, so that when we arrive at those preliminary and then final decisions, our teachers feel like they have also been involved, and their input is part of that process. So we're now at a point where we're a few weeks past the preliminary budgets and staffing being allocated to our school leaders for their leadership teams to consider, and our district department leaders also received preliminary allocations, and then there was a process of waiting to hear from the state. And so now that we have heard and are able to read, you mentioned 55 new policy mandates, some of them funded, some of them not funded. There's a lot of information that has come to us literally in the last week around the financial increases to public school districts in the state, and also some of the policy and practice-based things that we need to implement as well. So lots and lots and lots of budget activities and considerations informing this process. And then on the right of the slide, you'll just see some other things that we have to consider. For example, the federal COVID relief dollars are no longer at play. We need to account for historical underfunding from the state and some pretty significant inflationary expenses, in particular in the last couple of years. A bit of declining student enrollment. As I mentioned before, enrollment informs revenue, and so we're always paying attention to enrollment and what can we do to have families choose Hopkins and stay in Hopkins. Bye, Isabella. Okay, so I think we can go to the next slide. So just wanted to provide some context for this budget presentation. So just a quick note about our priorities. We are very intentional in Hopkins with what we're trying to achieve academically, socio-emotionally for our students, focus on wellness. As you can see, I don't want to read all of these things like I did earlier in the workshop, but we want to improve our predictable staffing models so that the budget allocations are truly reflective of what our students and staff need in our schools, and that's, of course, within the context of finite resources. We're focusing on instructional quality and academic rigor, providing science of reading training for all of our kindergarten, first and second grade teachers, reimagining K-12 math so that students are gaining more depth of knowledge and conceptual mastery in mathematics, and able to enter into a state college or university or out-of-state institution without needing to take remedial math. So really focusing on rigorous math instruction and rigorous course taking in general, especially at the high school level. We are introducing a new career-aligned pathway called CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant, which will allow many students to graduate with their CNA certification, which is really great. Also, on sort of the early end, we want to make sure that we invest effectively in early childhood and preschool learning. We know that early learning from birth to age 5 is very, very important for continued student growth. Our families are very attracted to some of our niche programming, including Chinese, Spanish, and outdoor immersion, project-based learning, which is a focus at Meadowbrook Elementary, advanced placement courses at our high school. We're adding 2 new courses at our high school, and that will also help us increase AP enrollment. We're also focusing on increasing enrollment in our K-12 virtual EDU or online academy. So there's a lot of high interest programming in Hopkins that we want to make sure we support as well as we can with those fiscal resources. And then, of course, engaging in restorative practices by investing in restorative culture practitioners at all of our sites, because we want all of our learning environments to be calm, to be places where we're focusing on staff and student wellness. And then, of course, this entire year, we have been preparing the system to transition 6th graders to our middle schools and 9th graders to our high school. So there's a lot of intentionally set priorities and focus areas to meet the needs of a variety of students and staff in our system. And then just a quick word on enrollment. So there are a lot of factors that inform our enrollment projections. You can see some of those listed on the next slide. There were some really interesting trends during the pandemic that some of them were reassuring and some of them were a little bit surprising. So some of the reassuring pieces were that we experienced ongoing stability with our kindergarten enrollment throughout COVID, so that was really nice to see because it's really important for us to get our families into preschool and kindergarten right away, and then they do tend to stay within our system until graduation. We also didn't see too much fluctuation with enrollment in or enrollment out percentages, so some stability there. Our immersion enrollment continues to stay strong, which is really great. We have Spanish immersion at Eisenhower and Ellis Smith elementaries, and then our Juntos programming continues at North and then at the high school as well, and kindergarten is at Eisenhower West and then the high school. A couple of the factors that were a little bit more surprising or unexpected is more mobility, and this was not just a regional but statewide and nationwide phenomenon with families moving out of the country, families moving out of the state. And then the one that we really want to focus on, which is more in the sphere of our control, is resident families who may be choosing a neighboring district or charter for a specific reason that meets the needs of their family. And so really, the needs of their family. And so really, these, if you go to the next slide, Elise, you can see a little bit of detail with the various reasons that inform these departures. So lots outside of our control, but the one that we want to focus on, and so getting some exit interview information from some of our exiting families to help us understand what's occurring with, you'll see the shaded row in the second column transferred to another district. What are the variety of reasons for those 86 student departures, and how might we make the improvements that are possible within our resources, within our programming, within the way we deliver services, so that we can retain as many families as possible and keep our families and students happy, which means we also have to support staff at high levels. So that's a little bit of enrollment information, and then as you can see, we're projecting somewhat stable, but also a very slight decline moving forward. And we feel that with some hard work around ensuring calm and safe environments, a focus on rigor, and really telling our Hopkins story in multiple ways. There's so many amazing and great things happening in our schools, and we need to make sure that we're out there on social media, on our website, word of mouth, to help our families understand all the great things that are happening, because we think we can influence that trajectory in a more positive manner to start to see projected enrollment increases. So with that, hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of context around the myriad of factors that inform our thinking literally all year long. It's a very complex process, and we're grateful to our Director of Business Services, Truro Chapanduka. He has a really smart team of people who are financially savvy. Our Human Resources team with Dr. Lightfoot and Brady Fleece and lots of others who are really working hard to make sure that our budgeting and staffing processes are as sound and intentional as possible. And there's a lot of collaboration involved. And again, I think the slight improvement we can make is how do we partner with our teachers who, you know, are busy all day teaching, right? So it's hard to have meetings during the day when teachers are teaching. So how do we adjust our schedule so that we can have more inclusive involvement when it's time to have these important discussions and decisions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Truro, and then do you want to talk more specifically about the budget?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Mary Reid. Good evening, Chair Westmoreland, respective board members. Again, some of the information we'll be sharing here is what we already shared at our April 25th meeting when we presented the preliminary budget. Some of the information is very new. It's information we just received in the last few days, which we are still digesting. As alluded by the superintendent, enrollment drives our revenue, and human capital drives our expenditures. 82% of our expenditures are people. So when we start to look at the budget, we are factoring in all those components around how do we optimally make sure that we resource our programs and our buildings with adequate staff, at the same time knowing that we also have finite resources. So one of the tools we developed starting about 3 years ago was a resource allocation tool, which is the predictable staffing model, which is actually based on if we want to open a building, how many staff do we need as a starting point just to get us going, and then figure out any remaining resources to be allocated to buildings with the understanding of the fact that each building has different priorities, they have different needs, so emphasis being put on communication between building leaders and staff on how they use those extra dollars which are not factored into the predictable staffing model. So as a starting point, when we did the preliminary budget, knowing that we didn't have enough information at that point in time in terms of any inflationary increases from the state, we were very conservative. We budgeted at a 0% increase for state revenue. Now that we have more information, we'll go back and start to relook at what that might look like. I do have some numbers with me today, which I will share, and I also have numbers in terms of other gaps we've identified with feedback from the community and our building leaders, and we'll just have to figure out the best way to prioritize. So the allocation components comprised of some increases. Like I said, 82% of our expenditures are people, so we have to factor in cost of living adjustment. So when we build the preliminary budget, we factored in a 3% cost of living adjustment. We are currently in negotiation with some of our bargaining units, and we'll definitely have to keep an eye on what those increases are beyond our 3%, which we had factored into the preliminary budget. We also factored in an increase of 3% for fringe benefits from 39 to 42%. We also factored in a 7% increase on purchase services and supplies in line with the consumer price index. This also comprises of utilities, and in any other energy inflationary increases. We also comprehensively went back and started to look at some of our categorical resources we receive either from the federal government or from the state, which are funds used for specific programs based on guidance from the state. So funding like achievement in integration, we did take a look and started to, make some changes. Title, in the past, title is always been allocated to some of the elementary buildings based on qualification. For fiscal year 24, we relooked at title and factored that title should be district-wide, so it benefits both the elementary and the secondary buildings. We also have funding sources like ARTSIS, which in the past was allocated to the junior high schools. Now it's allocated across our system, again, based on guidance from the state. So those are some of the changes which have been factored into the budget for fiscal year 24. What we didn't put into consideration, the one-time funding sources with the remaining dollars on the ESSA 3. Those dollars have already been allocated to buildings, so based on different priorities, based on guidance from the federal government on how we should be using those resources. Buildings are prioritizing based on different needs. Currently, our unassigned fund balance is sitting at 10% based on district policy. So those are some of the preliminary allocation components which were factored in when we started putting the budget together. As you know, our general fund revenue streams are varied for Minnesota school districts. We do have funds which are actually allocated through local governmental agencies, through the state and through federal agencies. So I'll go down the list of some of our revenue sources. Some are actually based on community input through vote. So the operating referendum, which comprises about 15.1% of our revenue, or $17.6 million, is voter approved. Location equity, which is board approved, comprises of 4.7% or $5.4 million. Capital projects levy, which is voter approved, comprises 11% of the budget or $12.9 million. Integration aid, 1.2%, which is categorical, or $1.4 million. Compensatory aid, 4.4%, or $5.1 million. And as I go more deeper into some of the information we've received from the state, compensatory aid will slightly increase. And you'll see that as we present the final budget to the board on June 6th. English learners, about 0.3%, $392,000 based on when information was developed, but there's also going to be some slight increase on that cross-subsidy. Special education, $10.9 million or 9.4%. Again, another revenue stream which will increase based on the information we just received from the state. Federal grants, this comprises of title, ESSA, about 2.6% or $3 million. Extended time, 0.4% or $409,000. And about 51% or $59.4 million is non-categorical revenue. And that will also change as we go through some of the allocations from the state. On expenditures, 56% or $65.4 million is salaries and wages, and this is factoring in the 3% cost of living adjustment. This number might change as we start to get information through our negotiations. 23.5% or $27.4 million benefits. 14.8% or $17.3 million purchase services. This also includes our transportation. It includes other special services which are provided by third parties. It also includes some of our maintenance services for our buildings. 2.8% or $3.3 million supplies. 1.49% or $1.7 million capital expenditures, which includes some of our furniture and fixtures, or any other capital expenditures which do not qualify within the capital projects. 1.3% or $1.5 million other expenditures. These are dues, conferences, any other miscellaneous expenditures which do not qualify within the other categories based on the Uniform Financial Accounting Reporting Standards. So, as I mentioned, this is based on the 0% increase. So right now, based on the 0% increase, we are looking at 116.8 million in revenue and 116.8 million in expenditures. Those numbers will change as we start to add more information into our budget based on the information we've received from the state, as well as some of the needs which we have been costing based on feedback we have received either from the community or from our buildings within different programs. So we also took a step further and dissected this budget so that we can identify what we directly allocate into schools, what is controlled at the district-wide level, and what is controlled within departments. So when we break down everything, about 57% or $67.1 million are direct school allocations, either through the predictable staffing model or through discretionary dollars which are calculated through enrollment. 37% or $43.6 million are district-wide allocations. These are allocations which are directly impacting buildings but are maintained and controlled at the central level. So transportation is controlled and maintained at the central level, but it's feeding into buildings. Custodians, maintenance, our insurance for the district, our other post-employment benefits, those are all district-wide allocations, but for the majority, they are actually impacting buildings. And then we have about 5% or $6.1 million being department allocations, and departments which support buildings. For example, our business office, we process payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and of our grant compliance. We have our human resources, talent acquisition, and performance management. We have our governance and management, which comprises of the superintendent's office, the board. We have our innovation, design and learning, which comprises our teaching and learning. We also have the central office part of special education. So those all sit within the department allocation. And as you can see, about 95% of our budget is actually directly going into buildings, and 5% is central office departments, which are supporting building initiatives. So based on the information we just received from the state, again, looking at enrollment as a driver of revenue coming into the district, and here we have some push and pull factors at play. Just knowing that initially when we projected our enrollment for fiscal year 23. The actual enrollment coming in ended up not meeting the projection, so that has an impact when it comes to any funding coming into the system. The state announced that they would be increasing our basic allowance formula by 4%. But then when you start to factor in that our projections did not tally up to our actual enrollment, so there were some negative impacts, which really had a negative effect on the overall percentage coming into the district. So instead of getting a 4%, it actually translates to about a 3%, and that does definitely have some negative effects when we start to look at what we are receiving, what we are trying to negotiate with our bargaining groups, as well as any other needs coming from the community. On the revenue side, I do have some breakdowns on what is anticipated based on this 4% increase from the state, which kind of translates to a 3%. So on the basic allowance revenue, there's an additional revenue of $1,957,230. We have $39,132 through declining enrollment. Additional $247,725 for compensatory revenue, an additional $296,414 for English learners, an additional $14,234 for operating capital, an additional $106,660 for transportation. And again, some of these increases categorical. So for example, when you look at English learners, which the district cross-subsidizes, those dollars will definitely be channeled for that program. We also have about $3.5 million for special education. So that's what we are anticipating here, about $2,661,395 for general education aid and $3.5 million for special education. Again, these are still preliminary. As we start to get more information and as our enrollment numbers change, we may see some increases, we may see some decreases. So we'll just continue monitoring and just making sure that we inform the board. So as we have been meeting with district leaders on a weekly basis, one of the exercises we gave them was to go back based on what we had provided them in terms of the preliminary budget, go back and identify any additional needs which will need to be addressed if we get additional funds. So we went back and costed, some of the additional needs based on some of the information we are getting through negotiations. As I mentioned, when we initially put together the preliminary budget, it was based on a 3% cost of living adjustment. We have gone back and started to look at, okay, what does a 5% increase mean? So across our different bargaining groups. So a 5% increase will amount to about $1,859,000. So if you take a $1.9 million basic allowance revenue increase, and then you factor in a cost of living adjustment of about additional $1,859,000, you can just see that it becomes a wash. So we do have some work to do in terms of going back and relooking at our programs and any additional resources which may be needed to mitigate and address some of the information we've received from the community. We also did cost some of the needs based on feedback we received from district leaders, and those amounted to about $1,787,600. And again, we'll just have to figure out the best way on prioritizing those resources. An additional for district-wide allocations of about $400,000 for athletics and transportation. So just for the general aid, if we add everything up, it comes up to about a little over $4 million against a 2.6 million revenue, and figuring out the best way to intentionally address the needs, at the same time being very careful about any potential landmines we may not know right now. There's some provisions in the legislative update which may require district investments. We are still in the process of identifying what those look like, and we'll make some calculations and bring more information to the board. The other pieces around budget is this involves our proprietary funds, our food service fund, and our community aid. So for food service fund, knowing that going into next year, we'll be starting the Universal Meal Program, where scholars will be receiving free meals. Currently, our anticipated revenue for food service is $3,961,042, and our anticipated expenditures are $3,890,878, leaving us with a surplus of about $70,164. We'll still go back and scout on things and bring back any additional information to the board. For community education, for all the different programs in community ed, we are anticipating revenues of $11,101,326 and expenditures of $11,064,462, leaving us with a surplus of $36,863. With that, I will take any questions from the board.
Thank you very much, Director Chapman-Duca. This gives us a good idea of some of the allocations from the state that are coming our way that are not yet integrated into the budget, but will be by the time we do our final approval, of course, as well as some of these contextual factors that you and the team are navigating about how to best use these resources now that we know what we're getting from the legislature, and we just found that out about 4 or 5 days ago. So that is recent information. Just a process clarification for our community members. So as you saw in the opening slides, we've been talking about this budget for a very long time, many months now, and we are moving toward our final budget approval, which is slated to take place on June 6th. So this is an information and discussion item tonight, so that the board can get any of our questions answered, and so that our community kind of knows where we're at and how we're thinking through some of these resources that are coming from the legislature. So with that, I'll open it up to my colleagues.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes, Director Adams.
Terrell, could we go back to slide 9? Is there a possibility to display that? I guess that's a question better directed to Elise.
One more.
Keep going. There we go. I had a side conversation with Director Ross here during the gap between our meetings. And one of the things that he's been wondering is, and it made me pause to consider it too, is there any flexibility that we have in raising additional revenue from any of these sources, either an operating referendum or refinancing some of our capital projects so that we could reduce the interest expense on that. Are there any options there for us?
Well, thank you, Director Adams. To my understanding, right now, I think with the referendum, our current referendum is slated to expire in 2027, but the district does have, obviously with the approval from the community, we can go back and do a renewal. We can do a renewal plus inflation if that becomes the need, which may increase some of the revenues coming into the district. What we've tried to do is to balance between, the referendums and the local options we have around property taxes. So when you start to look at how we try to navigate some of the debt services so that it doesn't burden our taxpayers, and it also kind of increases the capacity of our referendum. And I know, as you may know, Director Adams, like we do have some limitations in terms of like right now the current structure around the board having the autonomy to be able to increase referendum beyond our current threshold, which is where we are kind of getting close to that.
How close to the current threshold are we on operating referenda?
I'll have to go back and recheck the numbers again, but I think we are kind of hitting the ceiling. That's my understanding, but I can take a look and see how close. I know I've had some conversations with Minnetonka and Eden Prairie, because they are also kind of in the same situation we are.
Okay. And then I was looking at slide 12. You know, we've had a lot of questions put to us via email and in person regarding the music program and arts program in general. On slide 12, which one of those categories does our music program fall into? Is it funded by a direct school allocation, district-wide? Is it a department? Which one?
That's funded through the direct school allocation. It's part of our predictable staffing model, so it sits within that direct school allocations.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair Westmoreland.
Thank you. And on your last point there, Director Adams, during the workshop, we had a conversation about the budget and talked about the need to see those school level budgets as part of that final budget approval process. So those will be included in the materials that we'll approve on the 6th so that our community members can see how those resources are allocated, and that board members have an understanding of that before we approve. So, other comments or questions for Director Chapanduka? Because I know we have some community members who have done some really great advocacy around closing the special education cross-subsidy. Wondering, and I know we talked about this during the workshop, we're just gonna do like a repeat performance on this question. Wondering if we could take a look at slide 14, where you've included proposed allocations, an increase that we're getting from the state for special education. And if you could please describe how that is eliminating or reducing the special education cross-subsidy, which for folks who are not aware of what that term means, it's the amount that we as districts pay to cover special education services because the state is not living up to its federal requirement, and the federal government plays a role in this as well by fully funding special education, and this has been a problem for decades. And this year, the legislature made some great strides toward eliminating that gap and providing more funding for special education, but wondering kind of what those percentages look like for us here in Hopkins.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. So when we look at our special education, and in the past, the cross-ups has always been between 65-35, 60-40, depending with, any additional funding we are getting from the state. So our special education budget, I'll just give it a ballpark figure, it's about 17 million. Right now we are receiving a little over $10 million from the state, meaning that our general education aid has to actually prop up special education with close to $6 to $7 million. So an additional $3.5 million means that we are now getting about $13.5 million from the state against 17 million in total budget. So it kind of closes the gap, leaving us with about maybe close to 4 million, 3.5 to $4 million, which will be funded out of the general education aid. So that may probably put us to something like 80-20 when you start to look at, the grand scheme of things.
Thank you.
Chair Westmoreland?
Yes.
I was told that the bill that passed would fund 40% of our cross-education subsidy for next year and 50% the following year. So it seems to be pretty much in the ballpark for us.
Thank you. Anything else on this item before we move on? Great. Well, thank you very much, Director Chapin-Duca, and we will look forward to continuing the conversation on June 6th.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Torero.
Next, we'll move on to our policies and first read. I will turn it over to Vice Chair Andreessen, who heads up our monitoring committee.
Thank you, Chair Westmoreland. I would like to invite Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot to the table to help us walk through these policies that the monitoring committee has reviewed and talked about. They are policies 513, 601, 603, and 620 around student promotion, credit for learning, curriculum development, and instructional goals. I also wanted to thank our leaders in the district who specialize in this for looking over these policies and helping us craft needed changes. And one of them was quite a heavy lift coming from the Minnesota Department of Education, getting in alignment. So I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot to walk us through each policy in order.
Thank you. Good to be with you all this evening. We'll walk through these policy by policy. And first we'll begin with 513, which is the Student Promotion, Retention, and Program Design Policy. You will note there were no recommended changes from the monitoring committee. We would be open to questions on 513 or anything related to it that's pertinent to this policy.
I think we can move ahead.
Great. 601, this was a piece of substantial work that looked at the curriculum and instructional goals. You will see that that has been updated with the best set of information that we have to date. As has been noted, if there are any legislative changes that may be pertinent, obviously when we do the summer work that would possibly have the updated information from the omnibus bills, anything that would have been signed, we will make the appropriate recommended changes at that time. But as it sits right now, this is Policy 601 related to the curriculum and instruction goals.
Quite a bit of change in this policy, which is really exciting. Some really clear alignment with Vision 2031, our strategic vision, language pulled right from that and embedded, some clarification around state and federal law. Clearly, the equity lens that we've reviewed at this table that the monitoring committee uses was used on this policy. Quite a bit of equity-minded language embedded throughout. So is this the heavy lift policy that you were referring to? Because I'm just seeing a lot.
Yes.
Excellent. Just wanted to acknowledge how much has been changed in this policy. I don't have any questions or concerns about it, but certainly does appear to have been a heavy lift in committee, and thank you for all of this great work to really bring this policy up to date and make it more reflective of what we're actually doing in the district.
603 is the companion work to that, curriculum development. You will also see similar modifications that have been done with 603 to include additional information that also is statutory in nature as well. If there are questions on 603, can attend to those.
Chair Westmoreland.
Yes.
Nick, were there changes that were made in the recent legislative session that might make us change this again? Because I'm looking
Possibly.
here at the reading requirement.
Yeah, those I think are, and there were some elements that we'll want to take a look at specifically, depending on how any amendments were done with the actual text that has been part of the statute. So we'll look at all of that in general,
Okay.
but this is what has been updated to date. But there were some of the work that was done with the Reed legislation as part of the overall curriculum components that were part of the Education Omnibus Bill would certainly be something to review.
Yeah.
And we can do that. If there is any note, we can add that just because it now is a statutory requirement. We can put that into the policy if there are.
Okay. I see it was last updated in 2018, so it'll probably get revised again, I'm guessing.
And then the last policy that we have for you this evening is 620, credit for learning. There were some specific changes made here. If there are any questions on that, happy to attend to those as well.
See that quite a bit of language was removed from section 5 and language added around developing and providing a process. Just curious about the thought process in committee on this pretty significant change.
Happy to address that as well. Part of the work that we did was to look at being more general with that so that for each component there could be a more personalized approach. As we look, the statute requires a process. The language that was here was more, seemed to be more regulatory in the specific methods and wanting to provide opportunities to be more engaging was the hope in the design, and giving more latitude for that ability to do so was part of the construct here.
So more aligned with our personalized learning approach and less restrictive. Great, thank you.
There was also discussion around making it not being too prescriptive, but also making sure that it is something that is uniform across the district so that different families aren't having vastly different experiences based on where they are in the district.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on any of the policies before us tonight in first read? So with that, I would look for a motion that the board approve the above policies in first read and that the board direct the administration to prepare the policies for approval in second read at the next meeting as part of consent.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve the policies. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our board member reports. Director Adams,
Yes,
what's been going on?
the teacher called on me. Huh? Okay. Well, after our last meeting, the following night, I attended a listening session at Meadowbrook with Superintendent Mary Perry Reed. Light turnout, but it's always interesting to get the feedback from our parents in the district. My Fridays, the last 2 Fridays have been consumed by MSBA Chat, which is an online Zoom meeting that they do every Friday morning during the legislative session to keep school districts updated as to what's transpiring and may change their life over at the Capitol, and then followed by the Legislative Action Coalition. So I've done that. And then along with Director Ross and Director Andreessen and Director Hartland, we attended the scholarship ceremony at the high school, which is always a rewarding experience. And to see all these kids that are, including Oscar, who are going to be graduating and hopefully making good use of their scholarship money that gets awarded to them. So that's always a fun ceremony. And I got to see the senior wall up at the high school too during that session. So that was fun.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly say that I've enjoyed going to the various conversations that we're having across the district at the different schools. I think that it's nice to get the perspective from parents at different locations throughout the district, and really just appreciate the time that you are taking, Dr. Mary Perry Reed and staff at each of the schools to host those events and to allow us to be there as well to receive feedback and just to hear the conversations. So have appreciated that in the past couple weeks.
Excellent, thank you. Just one quick announcement from me. Director Hartland, Director Adams, and I met to plan our candidate information night. So there are 4 seats that are up for election this year in November, 4 seats on the Hopkins School Board. And it's our practice to host a candidate information session every year that we have an election. For community members who are interested in running for school board, it'll be about an hour long. It will take place on June 13th from 6 to 7 p.m. here in this room. We will also live stream it and record it, and that recording will live on the school board page on the website for folks who are unable to make it that night but interested in finding out more about running for the board. So we have an incidental report to approve this evening. So I would look for a motion to approve the incidental report.
I move to accept the incidental report.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to accept the incidental report. Any discussion? Seeing none.
Chair Westmoreland, I
Yes.
just wanted to quickly call our public's attention to this report. I think it is a really innovative and quite remarkable program that Hopkins is doing that is serving federal setting for special education students and creating a bridge from that setting back into other buildings across our district. It's a really nice partnership within the district, but also incredibly innovative for meeting very individualized needs in the district. So I just wanted to call everyone's attention to something really great that Hopkins is doing for our community.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second to accept the incidental report. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our second public comment period. This is for comments on items that are not on the agenda. And we did receive one voicemail that will be played during this time. There's a visual aid that goes along with the voicemail, and so I'm going to pass those down. And Elise will play our voicemail from Nancy Pavlik.
Distinguished school board members, this is a non-agenda topic. My name is Nancy Pavlak, and I'm a Lindbergh High School graduate, class of 1979. Mr. James Schluck, an art teacher in the district for 34 years, passed away late in 2022. Teaching for as long as he did, he touched countless lives, especially during an era where there weren't a lot of male teachers who could also be considered a role model for students. Mr. Schluck was also the first girls softball coach at Hopkins Lindbergh High School. If it wasn't for him, our team would never have had its inaugural season in 1978. We approached the athletic director at the time, and he gave us a caveated no. So we bought our own shirts and shorts, ironed on our own numbers, and proceeded to beat most of our well-established competition. I'm calling to start discussions for naming the girls softball field at Hopkins in Mr. Schluck's honor. This gesture is befitting of someone who was not paid to coach. Mr. Schluck did this on his own time, outside of school hours, simply because a group of girls who wanted to play softball asked him if he would coach. The impact he made on the lives of his players still resonates today. He has left an indelible mark on my life and all of the lives of those he both coached and taught. I've already begun to collect stories, memories, and relics of teammates. I'm on a mission to see this through. This gesture is small, but would be impactful for all generations of players who have competed on that field, who don't know the origin of the story of how and why they get to play today. Mr. Schluck's surviving family members are thrilled at the prospect of this, and I have their full support. Thank you for the generosity of your time and the board's consideration. Mr. Schluck said yes to a group of girls in 1978 who wanted to play softball. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Title IX, it would be incredible to honor the man who started this. This can be as easy as yes for the school board. Looking forward to speaking with you more, and thank you kindly.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and thank you for pulling together all of these supporting materials for us to read over as well. So with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins adjourned at 9:09 p.m. Thank you.